Brother and sister, there comes a moment in life when the tables turn, and the very people who thought they could walk away from you begin to understand that they didn't just lose a person. They lost a lifeline. You see, some folks underestimate the value of your presence until they have to live with the weight of your absence. They treat your loyalty like it's common, your kindness like it's endless, your patience like it's guaranteed. They believe that no matter how they speak, no matter how they act, no matter how many times they break trust, you will still be there because you always have been. But what they fail to realize is that your staying was not weakness. It was choice, and choice can change. When you were in their life, you became their anchor in the storm, the light in the dark, the quiet voice of reason when chaos surrounded them. You covered their shortcomings without complaint. You prayed for them when they couldn't pray for themselves. You held them up when their own strength was gone. And because you did it so consistently, they began to confuse your grace with necessity. They assumed you would always be the one to bend so they could remain unbroken. Here's asterisk T. There's a strength in simply being there that many people don't recognize until that presence is gone. Your presence was not just physical, it carried a weight, an energy, a calm authority that spoke without words. You didn't always need to be the loudest voice in the room, because your consistency was its own declaration. Wherever you showed up, things seemed to steady. Your presence could shift the atmosphere. It could calm storms without raising its volume. It could bring order without drawing attention to itself. People underestimated that because they confused quiet with smallness. They mistook humility for lack of influence. But the truth is, you didn't need to force your impact. It radiated naturally, and those who were around you were better for it even if they didn't say so. When you stepped into someone's life, things changed. Maybe it was in the way you noticed details others missed, the way you made space for people to be honest without feeling judged, the way you gave time and attention without making it feel like a transaction. Maybe it was in how you were dependable, showing up not only in the good times, but also in the moments when everyone else faded into the background. Your presence wasn't about filling a chair or having your name on a list. It was about bringing your whole self into the moment. That kind of presence has a way of strengthening others without them even realizing it. You didn't have to announce that you cared. People could feel it in the way you listened. You didn't have to prove your loyalty. They saw it in the way you stayed. You didn't need to remind them of what you'd done for them. They knew, even if they pretended not to. And because you carried yourself with such steadiness, some people began to think it was easy for you. They thought you never got tired, never had moments of doubt, never needed someone to do for you what you so freely did for them. They didn't realize that your strength wasn't the absence of struggle. It was the choice to keep showing up even when you were tired, the decision to keep standing even when life tried to knock you down. Your presence had the power to bring people back to themselves. In your company, they remembered who they could be. You gave them courage they didn't know they had, not through speeches or demands, but through the example you set. You proved that stability was possible, that kindness could be strong, that love could be both firm and gentle. You showed them that someone could be fully committed without being controlling, that someone could stand by them without losing themselves. And over time, that presence became a pillar in their life. They leaned on it. They relied on it. They even built parts of their identity around it. The thing about the power of presence is that it often works in the background. It doesn't demand constant recognition or applause. It doesn't push itself forward just to be noticed. And because of that, it's easy for people to start thinking it will always be there. They start thinking that the one who's always present doesn't need to be appreciated because they know how I feel. They convince themselves that the one who has always shown up will keep doing it no matter how they're treated. They forget that presence is a choice, and choices can change when they're undervalued. When that presence is suddenly gone, the void is unmistakable. The silence feels heavier, the days feel longer, the challenges feel harder. It's not just that a person is missing. It's that the steady force they relied on is no longer there to keep things from tipping over. And it's in that moment they begin to understand that what they thought was ordinary was actually extraordinary. What they took for granted was the very thing holding them together. The conversations that seemed casual were often the ones keeping them from falling apart. The quiet prayers you prayed over them were the shield they didn't even know they had. The encouragement you spoke into their life was the fuel that kept them moving forward when they were close to giving up. The power of presence is not about being perfect, it's about being real, being constant, being willing to stand in the gap for someone else when the ground under them is shaking. It's about carrying a kind of influence that doesn't fade when the lights are off, a kind of strength that doesn't vanish when the crowd leaves. And it's about realizing that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply showing up again and again, with your heart open, your spirit steady, and your commitment unshaken grace. It's one of the most beautiful gifts a person can give, but it's also one of the most easily abused. You offered grace not because you were naive, but because you understood that people are flawed and life is messy. You gave second chances not because you didn't see the wrong, but because you hoped the right could still come forth. You covered mistakes, overlooked slights, forgave quicker than you were thanked, and extended mercy when others would have closed the door. And for a while, people appreciated it. At least they said they did. But over time, the very grace that kept relationships alive began to be treated as something expected instead of something cherished. When someone receives grace often enough without understanding its cost, they begin to see it as part of the scenery rather than a sacred gift. They stop noticing how rare it is. They stop appreciating the patience it takes, the humility it requires, and the self-control it demands. Instead, they start assuming that no matter what they do, you'll find a way to excuse it. They start pushing boundaries, testing limits, seeing how far they can go before you finally say enough. They think your forgiveness is a sign that you'll never leave, rather than a sign of how deeply you value peace over conflict. But grace isn't endless because the giver is weak. It's offered because the giver is strong. It takes strength to hold your tongue when you could lash out. It takes strength to open your arms when you could turn your back. It takes strength to let go of offense when you have every right to hold on to it. And it takes strength to believe in someone's better self, even when they've given you reasons to doubt it. That kind of grace doesn't come cheap. It costs emotional energy, personal sacrifice, and a willingness to endure discomfort for the sake of someone else's growth. Yet, when grace is taken for granted, it starts to feel less like a gift and more like an obligation placed on your shoulders. People begin to act as if you owe it to them, as if your patience is their right and your forgiveness is automatic. They no longer see the effort behind the scenes, the nights you stayed up praying for them, the tears you cried over their choices, the times you bit your lip to keep from saying something you couldn't take back. They forget that grace is a choice, and every choice has a breaking point. When you kept showing grace, it was because you believed in the relationship, the friendship, the connection. You believed that people could change if given the space and support to do so. You believed that sometimes all someone needs is to know they're not being defined by their worst moment. And maybe for a time they did appreciate that. But slowly the gratitude faded. The apologies became less sincere. The thank yous became less frequent. And before long, they stopped even realizing you were making a sacrifice at all. It's a dangerous thing when someone starts to believe your grace is infinite, because they'll stop protecting it. They'll stop valuing the relationship in the same way. They'll start to gamble with your trust, assuming you'll always rebuild it for them. They'll start to speak recklessly, act carelessly, and expect you to absorb the fallout every time. And each time you let it go, they think it confirms that you'll keep letting it go forever. But the truth about grace is that while it's patient, it's not permission. While it's forgiving, it's not blind, and while it's merciful, it's not without boundaries. People often don't realize that every act of grace is a seed planted in soil that requires care. Neglect it long enough, and the soil dries up. Abuse it long enough, and the seed stops growing. You can't keep pouring into someone who only takes without ever replenishing. And when that grace finally runs out, the shock is almost always greater for the one who received it than the one who gave it, because they never believed the well could go dry. There comes a point where the one who gives grace realizes they've been holding the door open for someone who keeps walking out without learning how to stay. And when that door finally closes, the one who took it for granted finds themselves outside, staring at a wall they thought would always be a doorway. That's when the absence of grace feels heavier than its presence ever did. That's when the one who misused it begins to understand that what they treated as ordinary was actually the very thing keeping the relationship alive. That's when they learn that grace may be freely given, but it is never free. It always comes at a cost, paid by the giver. Here's ***, keynote no. 3. The awakening after absence. *** expanded to **7. 100 words ** in the same style you've been using. Absence has a way of revealing truths that presence can hide. While you were there, your influence was woven so seamlessly into their daily life that they couldn't always see how much of it was held together by you. You were part of the rhythm, part of the stability, part of the quiet security they carried without even thinking about it. They could take risks because they knew you were there to catch them if they fell. They could face storms because they knew you'd help them navigate through. They could stumble without fear of complete collapse because you were a steadying force they could lean on. And when you're that consistent, people start to believe that the consistency is just part of life itself, not something you are intentionally giving. But the moment you step back, something shifts. The ground beneath them feels different. The things they once did with ease now require more effort. The decisions they once made with confidence now feel heavier. The silence where your voice once spoke becomes louder than any words could be. They start to notice little things, the absence of encouragement in the moments they've grown used to hearing it, the lack of understanding in situations where you would have given it, the missing peace in places where your presence used to calm their spirit. It's like the air changes, and though they can't touch it, they feel it in their bones. At first, they might not admit it. Pride will have them pretending they're fine. They'll try to fill the space with noise, activity, and people who tell them what they want to hear. But substitutes have a way of exposing themselves over time. The conversations feel shallow. The comfort feels temporary. The peace doesn't last past the moment. And the truth they've been avoiding starts to creep in. What they lost wasn't just a person. It was a covering, a strength, a connection that doesn't come around often. The awakening after absence isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a slow, dawning realization that hits them in quiet moments, the drive home when no one calls to check in, the late night when they want to share something, but there's no one they trust enough to listen, the struggle they face that no one else seems willing to help them carry. It's in those moments they start to remember the countless times you were there without being asked, the countless ways you gave without being prompted, the countless sacrifices you made without demanding recognition. They remember, and in remembering, they begin to see the truth. They didn't just lose your presence. They lost the part of themselves that was better when you were there. They begin to recognize the ways your absence has exposed their weaknesses. The areas where they once felt confident now feel unstable. The situations they once navigated with ease now seem overwhelming. The peace they once carried so casually now feels like a luxury they can't afford. And slowly, the illusion they held about their own independence begins to fade. They realize that while they may have been standing on their own 2 feet, much of their stability came from leaning on you in ways they didn't acknowledge. The human heart has a way of revealing its needs only after it's been deprived. While you were there, they could overlook the depth of what you brought because they had the comfort of knowing it was always available. But once it's gone, they see how rare it really was. They remember how you listened without judgment, how you gave without keeping score, how you made space for them to be vulnerable without making them feel weak. And they start to feel the ache of the absence not just in moments of crisis, but in the everyday spaces where you once quietly made life lighter. Absence becomes the teacher that presence could never be. It forces them to confront truths they ignored when they were comfortable. It makes them see how much they relied on you emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually. And perhaps most painfully, it shows them that the relationship they thought they could live without was actually the very thing that gave them the courage to live fully. It's a humbling realization, one that strips away pride and forces them to see that losing you wasn't just losing a person. It was losing the part of themselves that could stand taller, walk stronger, and face life braver because of the way you were by their side. There are roles in life that can be filled by many people, and then there are roles that only one person can truly occupy. You didn't just fill a space in their life, you defined it. What you brought wasn't generic, wasn't something anyone else could simply step into and replicate. It was a combination of your heart, your wisdom, your patience, your sacrifices, and your unique way of showing up that made your presence impossible to duplicate. People often believe that when someone leaves, they can find a replacement, as if relationships are interchangeable. But over time, they discover that while others might bring something, no one else brings you. Your role was never just about what you did. It was about who you were while doing it. Anyone could give advice, but yours came wrapped in understanding and discernment that made it hit differently. Anyone could listen, but you listened in a way that made them feel safe enough to be completely honest. Anyone could help, but you helped without making them feel indebted. You carried burdens with them without taking away their dignity. You corrected without condemning. You inspired without shaming. You encouraged without sugarcoating the truth. And all of that together created a role in their life that could not be swapped out like an accessory. When you were around, you became a steady reference point. They measured their growth by your encouragement, their recovery by your faith in them, their peace by your ability to bring calm in chaos. You became the person they trusted to hold their secrets, the one they went to when they didn't have the words for their pain, the one they knew would see them at their lowest and still believe in their potential for more. You weren't just a chapter in their story. You were the part of the story that tied the other chapters together. It's only when you step away that the weight of that role becomes clear. Suddenly, the places you filled so naturally feel empty. The support they thought they could get anywhere else proves harder to find. The wisdom they thought was common turns out to be rare. The loyalty they assumed was standard shows itself to be exceptional. They begin to realize that your role wasn't just one of convenience. It was foundational. Without it, other parts of their life start to feel unstable. They might try to replace you. They might look for someone who can listen the way you listened, care the way you cared, stand the way you stood. But they soon learn that while others may have some of those qualities, no one else has them in the way you do. Your life experiences, your character, your personal investment in them, those things can't be copied. Your role was shaped by the way you genuinely wanted to see them win, not for your benefit but for theirs. And that authenticity is something people can feel, even if they can't put it into words. There's a difference between someone who is present because it benefits them and someone who is present because they value you. You were the latter. Your role wasn't transactional, it was relational. You didn't keep score. You didn't hold their mistakes over their head. You didn't show up only when it was easy or when you had something to gain. You showed up because you cared, because you saw their worth even in moments they couldn't see it themselves. And that kind of presence is not just rare, it's priceless. In your absence, they start to understand the depth of what you brought into their life. They realize that while others might care, they may not care as deeply. While others might listen, they may not listen with the same compassion. While others might help, they may not help without expecting something in return. And as those differences pile up, the truth becomes harder to ignore. You weren't just another person in their life. You were the person who filled a role no one else could. It's a sobering realization, because once that role is gone, there's no going back to how things were. They may find people who are good, but they will always measure them against the standard you set without even trying. They will always remember the way you made them feel seen, the way you gave them space to be imperfect without being unloved, the way you brought clarity when their mind was clouded. And no matter how much they try to convince themselves otherwise, they will know deep down that losing you meant losing something they will never be able to recreate, no matter how hard they search, or how far they go. And isn't it something how the same person they once treated as replaceable becomes the very person they can't replace? They look at others and realize no one carries your depth, no one matches your sincerity, no one has your wisdom or your way of loving without conditions. They search for your voice in the words of others, your steadiness in the actions of strangers, your light in the presence of new faces, and they come up empty. Not because others aren't good people, but because you are not easily replicated. You were the safe place they didn't appreciate. You were the covering they didn't acknowledge. You were the reason they could stand taller than their circumstances, even when life pressed hard. And now, without you, the weight of life presses harder, and they realize they've been carrying less, not because life got lighter, but because you were carrying part of it for them. You were their quiet strength, their unspoken encouragement, their unseen rescue.